was Wednesday, May 3rd, 2023. The night felt ordinary. The streets were quiet. The children were already asleep. But behind the walls of one small home, something had been building for months. Something invisible, heavy, and sharp. A man stepped into the hallway he'd walked 100 times before. His home, once filled with laughter, Sunday dinners, bedtime stories, had grown colder in ways he couldn't explain. That night, it was silent. Too silent. He called her name. No response. He knocked gently on the bedroom door, the door they once opened together, now closed tighter than ever. There was no sound on the other side, just that unsettling silence. She had left the house early that morning. She returned after dark. No words, no eye contact, no explanation. He only wanted to talk. But what happened next would rip apart everything they built. Before the night ended, 2 lives would be shattered. 2 children would wake up to flashing lights, and a secret would finally come to the surface, one soaked in quiet rage, betrayal, and a decision that could never be undone. This is the story of a love that broke without warning, and a night that ended with a door never opened again. This is The Bedroom That Never Opened. They met like many couples do, at a small gathering with mutual friends where laughter covered up loneliness and new faces offered a kind of hope neither of them had felt in a while. She was soft-spoken, poised, and observant. She listened more than she spoke, but when she did speak, her words were measured, carefully chosen, like someone who had lived through more than she let on. He was calm and thoughtful, a man who didn't fill the room but had a way of making people feel safe when he entered it. Their connection was fast, but not careless. Within months, their relationship grew into a bond that friends described as intense, quiet, and almost too perfect to last. Less than a year after meeting, they were married in a modest ceremony attended by family, neighbors, and a few close friends who believed, without question, that the two had found exactly what they needed in each other. Most people saw it as a beautiful love story, a single mother finding stability, a working man finding peace. To the outside world, it looked like a union made for healing. But inside the walls of their home, the story was less romantic. The disagreements started early, often over small things, missed calls, late arrivals, forgotten chores, but the tension didn't explode the way it does in dramatic stories. Instead, it crept in slowly, like mold in corners no one notices until the damage is already done. Friends who visited noticed the quiet first, not the comfortable kind, but the kind where voices were held back and eye contact came with effort. The television was always on, even when no one was watching it, like they needed sound to fill the space between them. Neighbors heard raised voices some nights, muffled arguments that never lasted long, followed by long hours of silence. No plates were thrown, no punches were ever seen. But something darker was settling into the space between them, something harder to name. They had 2 children, both under the age of 10, bright, cheerful kids who adored their parents and never seemed to notice the emotional weight hanging above their heads. Children rarely do, until it's too late. She often left the house early in the morning, sometimes without saying where she was going. He would come home after work and find her already in bed, or completely withdrawn behind a closed bedroom door. Sometimes days would pass with little more than passing words about groceries or bills. There were no police reports, no history of domestic violence, but those closest to them said something always felt off. Not dangerous, just unsettling, like standing in a house where the lights work, but the warmth is gone. He confided in his younger brother once, saying he felt like a guest in his own home. She never really opened up to anyone. She never had to. Her silence said enough. Still, they smiled at church. Still, they attended family functions. Still, they posted photos with their kids on holidays. And every time someone asked how things were, the answer was always the same. We're doing fine. But behind those practiced smiles, the marriage was unraveling, not in shouts or scandal, but in silence, coldness, and things left unsaid. This wasn't a house of fire. This was a house of ice. And ice, though quiet, still kills. It was a Wednesday, May 3rd, 2023. He returned home sometime after 7 o'clock p.m., worn down by the kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from labor alone, but from carrying the emotional weight of a marriage growing colder with every passing day. The house was quiet, too quiet. The children were in the other room, already bathed and fed, but she was nowhere to be seen. He moved toward the bedroom, expecting to find her lying down or maybe scrolling through her phone. But when he reached for the handle, it didn't turn. The door wasn't just shut. It was locked from the inside, not jammed, not accidental, deliberately locked. He paused for a moment, unsure if he had misunderstood the situation. Then he knocked. Once. Then again. Still no answer. He raised his voice, not to provoke, but to be heard. Minutes passed before a sound came from inside. Her voice finally answered, distant and dry. There was no warmth in it, no explanation. She didn't open the door. She didn't say where she had been. Her tone was flat, cold, and final, as though nothing about her silence required an explanation. He asked why the bedroom, their bedroom, had been locked since morning. He reminded her that she left the house early and didn't return until late evening. He questioned the distance, the absence, the refusal to speak, or even share the space they had built together. According to statements later made to authorities, she dismissed his concerns. She didn't try to explain. She reportedly brushed off the conversation, laughing under her breath, offering no apology and no remorse. Neighbors living next door told police they could hear raised voices through the wall. One described it as the kind of argument that starts slow but doesn't end well. Another said it sounded like two people who didn't recognize each other anymore. He had spent the entire day assuming that everything would return to normal, that whatever tension lingered between them could be solved by a single honest conversation. But when she stood behind that locked door, unbothered and unbending, something inside him cracked. He wasn't violent. He didn't break the door down. But he kept knocking. He needed to be let in, not just into the room, but into whatever thoughts had taken his wife so far away from him. And when she refused again, something shifted in the air. The shouting stopped. The house became quiet once more, but it wasn't peace. It was pressure. The kind that comes just before something breaks. By 10 o'clock p.m., the voices were gone. No more yelling, no more movement, just stillness. The kind that makes the walls listen. No one outside the house could have imagined what was about to happen next. No one could say for certain who struck the first blow that night. Voices escalated quickly, turning from angry words to crashing sounds that pierced the quiet of the neighborhood. Neighbors who heard the commotion stopped what they were doing, frozen in place, unable to believe what was unfolding just a few feet away. When someone finally mustered the courage to knock on the door and check, the scene inside was already tragic. He lay motionless on the floor, a single wound deep in his back, bleeding steadily. The weapon was a kitchen steak knife, slick with his blood. She stood nearby, breathing heavily, her face empty of tears or cries, just a distant, hollow stare. Paramedics arrived shortly after the call, finding him still alive but barely holding on. Despite their efforts, he passed away about 40 minutes later at the hospital. The quiet home had been shattered forever by one fatal act that night. When she arrived at the police station, she didn't deny what had happened. Her voice was low and soft, almost as if she were still trying to make sense of the night's events herself. She said, "He pushed me. I panicked. I didn't mean to hurt him. I just wanted to stop him." Despite her words, the officers noticed something unusual. There were no visible bruises on her body, no marks on her arms or face, No defensive wounds, those telltale signs that someone had fought back or tried to protect themselves from harm. To the police, her calm demeanor stood out more than anything else. The lead detective assigned to the case later described her as looking tired, not scared, not frantic, but deeply exhausted, as if she had been carrying a burden for a long time and had finally reached her breaking point. She insisted that her husband had been abusive throughout their marriage. But when investigators spoke with neighbors, friends, and even people who worked alongside them, the stories didn't match her claims. One neighbor who had lived next door for years said, "He was gentle. He wasn't the kind to yell or lose his temper. If anything, he'd walk away from an argument before things got out of hand." Co-workers remembered him as calm and respectful, the kind of man who kept his emotions under control no matter what challenges he faced. Friends described him as patient and kind-hearted, someone who avoided conflict whenever possible. Even some family members expressed surprise at the accusations, saying they had never witnessed any signs of violence or aggression between the couple. The conflicting testimonies painted a confusing picture, a marriage filled with silent struggles and unspoken pain, but no clear evidence of the abuse she claimed. Her story was one of fear and desperation, but those who knew them well saw a different reality. As the investigation continued, authorities were left to piece together the truth from the fragments of a relationship that had slowly deteriorated beneath the surface. While the tragic events unfolded, two innocent children, still too young to fully understand the weight of what was happening, were asleep in the next room, unaware that their lives had just been shattered forever. They awoke not to the familiar sounds of their parents, but to the harsh reality of flashing police lights and the eerie silence that followed. The house that once held laughter and warmth was now cordoned off with yellow police tape, a stark reminder that nothing would ever be the same again. In the days that followed, Child Protective Services stepped in and took temporary custody of the two little ones, moving them away from the scene that had become a painful memory. The absence of their father left a void that no words could fill, and the absence of their mother from that moment forward only deepened the silence surrounding the family. Relatives who gathered to mourn described the family's tragedy as a generational curse, a heartbreaking cycle where love slowly transforms into rage, where the place meant to be a sanctuary becomes a site of sorrow and violence. They spoke in hushed tones about unresolved pain passed down through the years, wounds invisible to the eye but deadly nonetheless. The funeral was a somber affair. Friends and family gathered quietly to say their final goodbyes to a man taken too soon, a husband and father whose life ended in heartbreak. Yet, amidst the grieving crowd, she, the woman at the center of the tragedy, was not permitted to attend. The weight of suspicion and the gravity of her actions left no room for forgiveness or presence in that final farewell. As the days turned to weeks, the community struggled to make sense of how a marriage that once held promise had spiraled into such darkness. The children, now caught in the middle of a shattered family, faced an uncertain future, their lives forever marked by a night that changed everything. After the investigation concluded, she was formally charged with second-degree murder, a serious accusation that carried heavy consequences. When she appeared in court, there was no sign of tears or visible remorse from her side. Her voice broke the silence only once during the entire trial when she said, "I didn't mean for it to happen," a statement filled with regret, but lacking any clear explanation. However, the prosecution presented a very different version of events. They described a long history of simmering anger and frustration that had built up inside her over time. They portrayed her not as a victim, but as a woman who felt trapped in a marriage that had become a prison, a relationship where love had died and been replaced by resentment and bitterness. Witnesses and evidence were used to support the idea that this was not a sudden act of desperation, but the tragic climax of years of emotional turmoil and conflict. The jury deliberated carefully, weighing the testimonies and the facts laid out before them. After 3 hours of intense discussion, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict: guilty. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole, a punishment meant to reflect the gravity of taking a life, especially that of a spouse. The judge's final words echoed through the courtroom, sealing her fate. You turned love into murder. You turned home into hell. Those words marked the end of the trial and the beginning of a long sentence behind bars for a mother whose actions shattered a family forever. What causes a person to suddenly lose control, to cross a line that can never be uncrossed? Was this act planned long before that fateful night, carefully thought out in moments of anger? Or was it the result of years of unhealed wounds, trauma buried deep beneath the surface, finally erupting in a tragic explosion? Perhaps it was something darker. Hatred disguised as love, a poisonous emotion that slowly strangled the warmth between two people. She told the officers that night, if he hadn't knocked on that door, maybe none of this would have happened. Those words lingered in the air, hinting at a breaking point triggered by a simple knock, a small act that ignited everything. Yet, there is a haunting question that remains. If only love had been tended to with care, if silence had not been the only form of communication between them, would the outcome have been any different? If the cold distance that grew between them had been replaced by understanding, if their home had been filled with open conversations instead of locked doors and cold shoulders, he might still be alive today. He might be there now, quietly tucking his children into bed, watching over them as any devoted father would, and opening that bedroom door without the shadow of fear or suspicion. This story is more than just a tale of murder. It is a painful reminder of what happens when communication breaks down completely, when pride takes precedence over forgiveness, and when hearts are closed off behind locked doors. It is a lesson carved in tragedy, a warning that love left unattended can turn into something deadly. This is the Untold Crime Chronicles, where silence speaks louder than words, and every crime reveals a deeper story waiting to be told. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more gripping true crime tales. Share your thoughts or theories in the comments below. We want to hear from you.